Well, welcome back. In this episode of Time Machine, we'll travel back in time and visit the Channel Islands, which, believe it or not, contain some of the earliest evidence of people in the Americas. Specifically, we will explore the birth of Santa Catalina Island, a place that holds some very special memories for me and my family, as it probably does with many of you as well. Like my other videos in this series, I have colorized and enhanced each of the following historic images, not to alter the past, but to give these images a pulse and help transport you to a bygone era. No disrespect intended to the original photographers. In 1542, Spanish explorer Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo set out from New Spain, today's Mexico, with 3 ships, including his flagship, the galleon San Salvador. In 3 months' time, Cabrillo reached Santa Catalina Island, naming it San Salvador after his flagship. When Cabrillo's party landed on the island, it was reported that a great crowd of armed Indians appeared, whom, however, they later befriended. In 1602, another Spanish explorer, Sebastian Vizcaino, renamed the island Santa Catalina, having landed on St. Catherine's Day, and for whatever reason, the name stuck. When Europeans first discovered Catalina Island, major settlements could be found at Avalon, the Isthmus, Emerald Bay, and Little Harbor and Shark Harbor, seen here. Although this photo was taken nearly 100 years after the indigenous inhabitants were forcefully removed from the island in the early 1800s, you can almost imagine what life must have been like for them foraging for fish, shellfish, and other marine mammals while also gathering plant foods like acorns, cattails, chia, berries, and nuts, plus the occasional rabbit or deer, if they were lucky. For over 9,000 years, the indigenous Chumash and Tongva flourished on the Channel Islands. The Chumash to the northwest and the closely related Tongva populating the southern islands, including Catalina. They were both master boat builders and mariners, traveling both between the islands and the mainland, creating a vast trading network and shell bead economies. Here is a reproduction of a Chumash planked boat, or tomol, meaning house of the sea for their reliability. The Tongva referred to them as a tia. This reproduction was made in 1912 by a Chumash elder, Fernando Librado, born at Mission San Buenaventura in 1839 as the son of 2 Chumash parents from the island of Santa Cruz. Look carefully and you can see how they sewed and lashed the planks together, sealing them with the naturally occurring asphaltum, what we used to call tar. I remember spending lots of time at Dana Point beginning in the early 60s, much of it hunting for shells or looking for our dinner, something the indigenous Ahashiman, the Tongva's southern neighbors, have been doing here for thousands of years. This photo was taken about 35 years before I first visited Dana Point. I'd read that Tongva made shell beads from the Olivella snail shells and used them as currency throughout California. Here are some examples of Chumash basketry and beadwork recreated by the Bowers Museum. My brother Malcolm and I used to collect these purple olive shells every weekend at Dana Point as kids and made necklaces out of them. There were tons of them before the harbor was built. Without realizing it, we were instinctively continuing an indigenous tradition. Art is definitely something that can bind together cultures and generations over time. Here is an example of a Chumash olive shell necklace I saw for sale on eBay. On the left are the shell beads used as currency. Catalina Island's Tongva traded items like fresh fish and soapstone they mined on the island for mainland resources such as acorns, chia seeds, and deer hides. Our family currently has a collection of shells on display at the Dana Point Headlands Interpretive Center. If you look carefully, you can see an olive shell dead center in this collection my family gathered starting in the late 1950s and continued till the harbor was completed in the late 60s. the indigenous Channel Island populations, including Catalina, would be irrevocably changed with the arrival of the Spanish in the 1540s. Forced relocations to mainland missions, like Mission San Gabriel seen here, decimated their populations and shattered their complex societies and trade networks that had existed for thousands of years. It was during the relocation of the indigenous Channel Islands populations by the Spanish missionaries that a lone woman, later named Juana Maria, was unintentionally left behind on San Nicolas Island in 1835, the most remote of the Channel Islands. After 18 years of solitary survival on San Nicolas Island, Juana Maria was finally found in 1853. Otter hunter George Nidever's crewman, Carl Dittman, followed her footprints to a crude hut of whale bones. Dressed in cormorant feathers, the last of the Nicoleno people was finally removed from the island. Her incredible tale of resilience tragically ended just 7 weeks later on the mainland, where she died of dysentery, a fate of many, quote, rescued indigenous people. Her story later inspired the enduring novel, Island of the Blue Dolphins. Juana Maria's story highlights the impact of early explorers and the fate of the majority of the indigenous peoples along the Southern California coastline. As recorded on October 7, 1853 in the San Francisco Herald. A short time since, I called to see the wild Indian woman. She is living with Mr. George Nidever, an old trapper who has been on this coast for the last 18 years. She was brought from the island of San Nicolas, 70 miles distant, and not from Catalina. No person has yet been found that can understand or speak her language. Most of the Chumash were relocated to either Mission Santa Barbara or Mission San Buenaventura, seen here in 1890. Their impressive structures and their agricultural and ranching empires at that time were built on the backs of the indigenous people from both the mainland and the Channel Islands populations. Keep that in mind on your next visit to any of California's 21 surviving Spanish missions established between 1769 and 1823. They are definitely worth a visit. In 1846, California Governor Pio Pico made a Mexican land grant of the island of Santa Catalina to Thomas M. Robbins as Rancho Santa Catalina. And like most of the other ranchos in California, they began raising sheep and cattle. Catalina Island, and Catalina Harbor in particular, was used during this time by fishermen and smugglers. I remember anchoring there as a kid on my aunt and uncle's 20-foot sloop, the Merrimack, in the mid-60s. This was part of a week-long trip circumnavigating the island and staying at almost every harbor and inlet possible. What a childhood my brother and I had. After serving in the U.S. Army during the Mexican-American War from 1846 to 1848, German immigrant Augustus W. Timms settled on Catalina Island and established a boat landing as well as a goat farm. This area became known as Timms Landing until it was later renamed Avalon by developer George Chateau in 1887. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The California Gold Rush didn't leave out Catalina Island. By 1863, it was reported that the island population totaled 100, with over half of whom were miners. Here's a shot of the Blackjack mine many years later. It turns out that silver, not gold, kept the mines alive. Well, at least until they eventually closed with the arrival of the Depression in the late 1920s. Remnants of some of these mines still exist in areas like Cherry Valley and near White's Landing. In 1857, Augustus Timms began developing the San Pedro waterfront property he had purchased from Diego Sepulveda, the land grant holder at the time. This was the birth of a seaport at San Pedro. The harbor was later jump-started with the introduction of the San Pedro and Los Angeles Railway extended down to Timms Point in the early 1880s. Known as the father of the Port of Los Angeles and one of the founders of the city of Wilmington, Phinius Banning, in the center of this photo, began his rise at about the same time as Augustus Timms. Arriving in early 1851, Banning went from a stagecoach driver to owning his own staging and shipping company by the 1860s. As we shall discover, Banning played a major role in the development of Catalina Island from very early on. Here are Banning's three boys, Joseph, Brent, and Hancock Banning. By the time these boys reached their 30s, they would play a pivotal role in the development of Catalina Island as a tourist destination. But again, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Here is Phinius Banning's son, William, often referred to as Captain Banning, driving one of their rugged, iconic Concorde-style coaches. Banning's Union Wagon Factory built these for durability and included a leather-cradled suspension system, a revolutionary upgrade when it came to comfort. Having by this time become a major player in the development of San Pedro, Phinius Banning, also an outspoken Union supporter, ceded land to the Union Army to build a fort at Wilmington, the Drum Barracks. Completed in 1862, these barracks served as the United States military headquarters for Southern California, Arizona, and New Mexico. And yes, that was a camel you saw. Here is how one Union soldier stationed at the Isthmus described his experience in a letter dated June 12, 1864. It reads as follows. The Isthmus is a beautiful location, although treeless and uncultivated. It does not exceed a furlong in width, and in length scarcely exceeds half a mile. Its course is north and south, and it has a harbor at each extremity. The north, or landward harbor, is well situated for small craft, and now engaged in trade from San Pedro. But a weird and bold scenery surrounds the south harbor, called by the way of preeminence, Catalina Harbor. Though small, it is deep and almost landlocked, affording safe anchorage for vessels of large tonnage at almost all seasons of the year. The Isthmus is almost exclusively occupied by the military now stationed there. Captain West, the officer in command on the island, is a quiet, estimable gentleman and a genial companion. His mild but firm discipline has endeared him to his men. Barracks are in process of erection, and it would be wisdom in the government to be liberal in its appropriations for military improvements on the island of Santa Catalina. The barracks mentioned by the Union soldier were built by Phinius Banning and were only occupied for about 7 months. This post was to serve two goals: to prevent the island from being used by Confederate privateers operating in the Pacific, and to serve as a potential reservation for militant Native Americans from Northern California. Taking in the view, sitting dead center in this photo, is James Lick, the Lick from the famous Lick Observatory, the first permanently staffed mountaintop observatory in the world, and with the world's largest refracting telescope at that time. By 1867, Lick had consolidated ownership of Catalina Island for less than $50,000. Check out the windmill, obviously powering a well pump which appears to feed into the reservoir to the right. Although no longer operational, this windmill still survives today at two harbors. While not much would happen on Catalina Island for the next couple decades, the burgeoning port of Los Angeles was about to explode. Between 1880 and 1890, the population of Los Angeles grew by over 350%, making it one of the most dramatic population booms in U.S. history. And Phinius Banning was at the center of much of this. Here is Timms Landing in 1876. By this time, jetties were constructed and the Los Angeles and San Pedro Railway had been completed by, you guessed it, Phinius Banning. The lumber you see here fueled the construction boom taking place at that time over all of Southern California. In this map of Wilmington Harbor, you can see the breakwater stretching out to Dead Man's Island. from the spit of land they called Rattlesnake Island. On the right, you see the San Pedro Railroad line stretching 21 miles to Los Angeles, a pipeline that would help this port grow into what is now the busiest seaport in the Western Hemisphere. Here is the first locomotive in Los Angeles County, named San Gabriel. Making its first run in 1869, this locomotive was the first of many to carry both freight and passengers. This would eventually provide a direct line for tourists hoping to board one of Phinius Banning's steamboats for a visit to Catalina Island. You see a slightly larger steam locomotive in this photo. I believe it is either the Los Angeles or the San Pedro, both built by the Schenectady Locomotive Works. The advent of steam power was to not only change transportation on land, but would eventually bring an end to the age of sail. Here you see them unloading cargo straight onto a flat car. The Los Angeles and San Pedro station became a very busy place. You can see both flat cars for freight and passenger cars for the growing number of people traveling to the coast. I'm not sure, but I'm guessing the grocery store sign behind the railroad car might read Banning. By the 1880s, San Pedro Harbor was bursting at its seams, with large 3- and 4-masted schooners hauling lumber from the Pacific Northwest. Cargo was unloaded using a mix of manual labor, using block and tackle, and early steam-powered cranes, directly to awaiting flat cars. Phinius Banning also began dredging the harbor in the 1860s. In 1871, he dredged a channel to Wilmington, allowing larger vessels to enter the harbor. You can see a steam-powered dredging machine in the background, behind that beautiful 4-masted schooner. In 1882, Phinius Banning purchased the first steam vessel on the Wilmington to Catalina Island run. A paddlebox sidewheel steamer, the Amelia included a well-appointed salon and restaurant. Although the steamship only operated for a year, it was the first of many Banning would purchase for the ever-increasing demand. In this painting of the Amelia, you can see Palos Verdes in the background, as well as the recognizable Sugarloaf on the left. At this time, the area was still known as Tim's Landing, but that was to change in just a few years. As the 1880s drew to a close, the Banning family continued to play a major role in the developing harbor and transportation company Phineas had created. Here is the Banning family at their home. Their home, barn, and gardens have been designated as a City of Los Angeles Historic Cultural Monument and is on both the California and National Registry of Historic Places. That certainly isn't a 6-horse team pulling that coach. 1887 would prove to be a monumental year for the development of Catalina Island as a tourist destination. In July of 1887, George Chateau bought Santa Catalina Island, sight unseen, from the estate of James Lick for a price of $150,000. Chateau planned on developing Tim's Landing into a resort and leasing out the other areas for mining and ranching. On the morning of July 13, 1887, Chateau boarded Banning's SS Falcon and traveled to Catalina for the first time. Here he is with some family members exploring Catalina Harbor. I believe the only real permanent structure that existed on the island when Chateau purchased it was the Civil War barracks built in 1864. Although Chateau's ownership of Catalina was short-lived, his contributions would set the course for the island's next century of growth and development. It's important to remember in context that at the time Chateau purchased Catalina Island, there was a huge real estate boom going on in Southern California. Two such boom towns were located 32 miles across the water on the shores of Dana Point, and less than a couple miles where I grew up. Referred to as paper towns, Dana Heights and San Juan by the Sea both fizzled out after a couple years. Here is the SS Falcon heading out of San Pedro Harbor, on a course for Catalina, no doubt. By the summer of 1888, Chateau's vision of a resort and vacation destination was well underway. In this shot, you can see both the Metropole Hotel, the steamer pier, and Chateau's steamer, the Ferndale, I think. This shot, taken from the steamer pier, shows the recently completed Metropole Hotel. A grand 3-story wooden structure, the Metropole was the first of many hotels to house the growing number of tourists to the island. Check out the windmill on the right. Like the windmill at the Isthmus, this one also powered a well pump to supply water to guests. Supplying water was, and continues to be, an ongoing challenge for residents of the island today. Believe it or not, George Chateau's original idea was to name the town Chateau. Here's a real estate advertisement listing lots for sale in the town of Chateau. Lots range from as little as a couple $100 to well over $1,000. I think we can all thank George's sister-in-law, Etta Whitney, who convinced George to rename the town Avalon after the mythical paradise described by Alfred Lord Tennyson in his poem, Idylls of the King. It wouldn't be long before the town of Avalon began to take shape. If you look carefully, you can see a couple of tents set up along the beach. Tents would provide lodging for many of the island's first tourists. The rolling hills surrounding Avalon had been used for grazing by the island's goats, sheep, pigs, and deer for nearly half a century at this point in time, and any trees that existed were most likely cut down for firewood by early settlers to the island. Within 2 years, Avalon was really taking shape. There is Banning's steamer, the Hermosa, built in 1888. It looks like it must be departing from the steamer pier. As we pan along the bayfront, you can see a number of tents that were rented out to visitors, often referred to as tent cities. And with a commanding view of the harbor is Peter Gano's Lookout Cottage, commonly referred to now as the Holly House. One of the oldest homes still surviving in Avalon, it was completed in 1890 and built almost entirely by Peter Gano himself, and the help of his trusty, nearly blind, retired circus horse, Mercury. Tent cities were a very common sight at many fledgling beach towns and resorts at that time. Besides lodging, I see they also offered coffee lunches and ice cream camp. What a treat that must have been back in the day. How many of you remember Big Olaf's waffle cones on Crescent Street? Within a year or two of opening, you can see that they have added some greenery around the hotel and a couple other permanent structures on the right. Visitors could rent boats to check out the crystal clear water, although Avalon's first glass-bottom boat wouldn't be introduced until 1906. The original town centered more towards the north end of the bay, and you can see that there are very few structures south except along the shore. On the right side of this photo, you can see the floodplain for the valley running straight to the beach. This may have been why they focused their construction on higher ground. Here's a shot of the Avalon Hotel on Crescent Street, next door to the Metropole Hotel. Built in 1889, it shared the fate of almost all hotels built at this time with the Great Avalon Fire of 1915. Sugarloaf Rock was a prominent natural landmark and major tourist attraction in Catalina in the 1890s. To understand why they might make this climb, think about what George Mallory's response after being asked why he wanted to climb Mount Everest. He simply replied, "Because it's there." By 1891, the town continued to grow. Here's Banning's new steamship, the Hermosa, which was built in 1888. Its wooden hull measured in at 135.5 feet in length, with Honduran mahogany and maple interiors. They don't make them like that anymore. Here's the Hermosa, getting ready to depart from Avalon. You can see the town now included several more permanent structures. I don't think it would be going out on a limb to suggest the structure with the bell tower is either a church or a school. I'm guessing church. As we pan over, you can see another early hotel built in town, the Glenmore Hotel. Over the years, the Glenmore has been added onto and modified continuously. I have very fond and a bit foggy memories of my high school graduating class weekend in Avalon. I'm not sure whose brilliant idea it was to send 150 18-year-old high school graduates, along with very little adult supervision, for a weekend stay on the island. I sincerely apologize for the San Clemente High School graduating class of 1974. If you continued to walk away from the shore, you would quickly find yourself surrounded by the rugged native landscape. You can also see a couple of parcels that Chateau had managed to sell. Unfortunately, the Southern California land boom peaked shortly after Chateau purchased Catalina Island, and Chateau would soon default on his loan. Chateau also took advantage of the natural beauty of the island by offering to take visitors horseback riding in the backcountry. Although no roads existed yet, many trails had been forged by the island's indigenous inhabitants, and years later, the ranchers and miners. Check out the three ladies riding side saddle. Financial troubles forced Chateau to close the Hotel Metropole for the 1891 season, and later that year the island was foreclosed and ownership reverted once again to the James Lick Trust. And I'll give you one guess on who picked up the proverbial baton. Yep, you guessed it. It was purchased by the prosperous Banning family in January of 1892 for $128,740. You couldn't purchase the smallest properties in Avalon for that amount of money today. Despite the financial setback during this mini-depression, George Chateau persevered. Looking to make his next fortune, George found himself prospecting in the Mojave Desert. After hearing his wife was ill, he hopped on the first train he could find heading back home. Unfortunately, while riding in the caboose, his train was struck from the rear by another train and killed instantly. Although Phinius Banning wanted to purchase Catalina Island many years earlier, it was his sons William, Hancock, and Joseph that eventually acquired the island. Intending to develop it into a major resort, they planned on building a dance pavilion, expanding the Metropole Hotel, a golf course, stagecoach tours of the island, as well as building a substantial infrastructure, including roads to the interior, a water and sewage system, and various other tourist attractions. But that'll have to wait until part 2, which I have already begun working on, by the way. I hope you've enjoyed this journey back in time and that I've sparked your curiosity. I would like to thank the many local historians, historical societies, and Facebook sites that have provided the bulk of photographs and historical information about events, names, places, and dates that I have included with this colorful peek back in time. Keep in mind that this, like my other videos, is simply an attempt to bring to life these historical photographs and weave them together, along with a wee bit of local lore. If you're interested in the unique history of Catalina Island and you would like to know more, please consider becoming a member and donating to the Catalina Museum of Art and History. I've attached a link below. And if you're visiting the island, plan a trip to the museum for a tour. You can find the museum at 217 Metropole Avenue. Well, again, thanks for watching. Aloha.